welcome to another episode looking behind the curation of Total Recall, Myth and Memory. It's an exhibition that's on at the Mercer Gallery in Harrogate until October the 15th, and I hope you can come and see it. One of the works in the exhibition is called Blue Bonnet, and it is by Georgie Hopton, who is a brilliant artist who specializes in collage and is joining me here today. Thank you so much for chatting with me. I'm really excited to hear about your process, about everything that you've got going on. So in our kind of emails about this, setting up this conversation, we commented that it's quite an early work. Blue Bonnet's quite an early work from your practice. And I was just wondering what it's like to sort of reflect on that, see it again, and how it feels to have that back on display.
Well, hi, it's really nice to talk to you, Joe. Thanks for asking to do this. It was really quite bizarre in a way to see that piece of work on a wall in an exhibition after all this time. And especially in Harrogate, because I had no idea that gallery even existed. So that was a lovely surprise. Well, it's strange. It's strange to see this work after so long, and it's strange to be asked to think about it. But as you might imagine, as soon as you do start thinking about something that you made a long time ago, it doesn't take very long before you see, you're able to zoom to the present and see all the connections and see, sort of like have this overview of where you've been and what's happened just from looking at a few images. It's quite amazing, really.
Yeah, because when I was researching works to put in this exhibition, it was really fascinating looking at your work subsequently, because this work feels quite different to what you sort of make now. And I loved reading interviews that you've given in the past where you kind of talked about your process as being about kind of cutting through time. And so it feels quite funny, giving you something from your past to kind of think about. It's almost like your methodology of collage kind of coming to life.
Yeah, and I know I've said it before, so you might have read it, but I do really feel that the thing that I find so accurate about collage in terms of experiencing time is that that certainly for me, and I'm sure almost everybody else, the way you think about things is fragmented and fractured, and you have the past butting up with the present, and you have memory butting up with experience. And so I feel like the actual process of making collage really reflects what it is to experience being alive.
Yeah, I think that is so powerful, because I think people probably first experience collage as children or as a child. And I think that is quite a core memory for many people, but often that process gets lost in adulthood. And I don't necessarily know that people kind of remember it as something that is part of art as a whole. And I think what you do is you elevate it and you bring it back into the conversation. And I really enjoy what you say about it, and thinking about all of the materials that you're putting into a piece. You're connecting all of these different elements together, bringing all of these ideas together, and then you've got this outcome.
Yeah, and relating back to what you were saying about children being introduced to collage early on, the irony is that I have absolutely no memory of actually making collage when I was young, when we were first making pictures. It strikes me that, I can see my friends' children, or did see them, sticking pasta and anything that was nearby on their picture with this beautiful, wild abandon and absolutely no judgment about it. Was like, no, that just seems like the right thing to do. Let's just get that, stick it on and have a look. And I must have done that. I must have done it. But as I did say recently in an interview, what I realized about my first experience of collage, it was experiential. I was surrounded by coloured wool and fabric in my mum's sitting room, and also she would re-wallpaper the wall above the fireplace on a regular basis, and that played a really pivotal role. All that combination of visual, colour, texture, and imagery really, had a massive influence on, I'm sure, why I ended up choosing to use collage, and also my quite often peculiar palette, I think.
So that's all from your mother?
Yeah.
I think that in itself is so interesting from a memory point of view. And, even if you permit me to project, like looking at Blue Bonnet, there's something quite nice about connecting kind of the female form with what you've just said, and that early image of yours. It's quite remarkable in some ways.
Definitely. And I realised on looking again at these collages, so the glitter ones, and then before that I was making sculptures that weren't dissimilar of things like I called them Harlequin sticks. I mean, I was very interested, I realise now, for a long time in identity, and that came directly from being small and dressing up. And also this other experience of collage I had was we had no money. We would always go to jumble sales. And I realized that I went from such an early age that when I did go into these big halls of tables and piled clothes, which of course were all different colors, I would see legs underneath the table and a torso and a head above it. So I would have the experience of people chopped. And it's funny because so later I go to make a series of self-portraits with essentially sort of wanting to talk about my symbiotic relationship with the vegetables that I'd been growing in America for years, and sort of wanting to put them to work as well, because I was frustrated that I was just in the garden so much. But I realised, so I was doing these self-portraits, they never had my head in. There were parts of my body and vegetables. And then I had this revelation one day, this comes from going to jumble sales, being tiny and either being under the table or stretching to look at the top of the table, and I'd have these lumps of colour and then bits of body. And so yeah, it's extraordinary to me how your experience when you're young absolutely directly influences what you make later.
Yeah, and do you feel that you see that in other artists who you're inspired by?
Well, it's funny, I don't necessarily see it, but I hear it. And I did have I had a sort of beautiful, what's the word? Well, I felt I had a real link I'd had this sort of theory for a while. I sort of imagined that the age 7 was especially pivotal for some reason. And then I read at the beginning of this beautiful Anthony Gormley catalogue about him being 7 years old. And it was still insisted that he went for his afternoon nap, which he hated, and especially in the summer, because you can imagine, so much life is going on, and he's being sent to bed at 3 o'clock or whatever time it is for a nap. And anyway, so what he taught himself to do was travel inwards. So he'd be underneath the sheet, and he'd basically concentrate very hard on his internal self and his body. And then out of that directly came all of those sculptures he made of himself, which I just thought, I absolutely believe that. And I feel the same thing happened to me in a way, that somehow at 7, there's this crystallization of experience, and somehow, what you concentrate on or what you really are interested in comes from that point.
Yeah, I mean, because obviously you don't really remember, sorry, excuse me, those moments of really early childhood. And
no,
I guess that is the age when sort of things sort of start to appear out of the mists of youth, and they stay with you, which I think is really nice.
There's all that space. If you think about being free to some extent from worry and care and obligation and timetable, there's a lot of space for things to actually rise up and make an impact. And obviously sometimes, unfortunately, it's traumatic events, but when it is experiential on a sensory level, I think they really do these points in time really matter and make a big difference. And relating to that moment in time when the jumble sales and the piles of fabric and wool, I also had a huge amount of piles of clothes that were all mine, because of course everything was cheap in the jumble sale. So it meant that I mean, I had this lovely experience for a few years of mum saying, what do you want to wear? And everybody else at school had a uniform on, and I chose my outfits. And that was really important to me because I understood very early on that you really felt different when you dressed differently. And so I know that the glitter hairdos and the bonnets come directly out of me and my understanding that wearing something in particular influences how you feel and how you project yourself. And you know, the I find anyway the joy you experience from becoming other characters, you know, for a few hours or a while, I think it's a really lovely thing to do.
Because I was going to ask about the bonnet and where that motif comes from. And so it's quite interesting that it is this childhood motif. It is this element of dressing up. There's fancy to it. And it's, because I've sent you something that I wrote for our curation of it, which was all about sort of like that idea of the woman. There's a lot of negative space. And it was really interesting because I've never seen it as just an item of clothing. I've always seen it as being this object that is being worn by this almost invisible person. It's sort of defining the boundary of that person, this invisible person. And so it's really interesting hearing you talk about it as, it being this magical part of your childhood, of your clothing. And like, I guess I might have got it slightly wrong in how I've imagined it. I've projected my own narrative onto it. So I don't know how.
Well, I think that it's very similar in a way, but I don't know if it's like the opposite or the same. But I feel that you know, the putting on of a dressing up object or something that you wouldn't ordinarily wear, you become visible. So perhaps it is exactly what you're saying, that there is a level of invisibility until you don something extraordinary or unusual or out of character. And it's definitely I mean, I have all sorts of ideas and feelings and experiences of and in and about femininity and being a woman, and you know, many of which are hugely negative and make me very angry and disappointed. And so perhaps on some level, you know, I've always been interested in talking about that, and certainly when I was making myself portraits. But also I'm never confident to have the whole of me visible. It doesn't feel, I just don't feel happy about it. And it's something to do with this understanding that there is so much judgment that I like to try to keep out of, because it's so deeply disorientating and discombobulating. And I think one's sense of self is so fragile anyway. And especially as a woman, it's very hard to feel happy asserting yourself. And I think certainly visually anyway, I think it's much better to speak or write or make work, you know. That's where I'm happiest.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that it is incredibly hard, and particularly today, you know, being bombarded with images of ideal beauty and all sorts of different things. It does become very hard to hold on to one's sense of self and one's own happiness within the appearance that you give off. Like, it can be very hard to battle all these projections.
I think it's impossible as soon as you see an image of yourself. I think when you're not looking at yourself, you're absolutely fine. And that's how I prefer it.
That's so funny, because I kind of have the opposite, where I'm like, if I can see myself and I'm like, yeah, you look good, then I'm like, fine, we're okay. But as soon as I don't see myself, I'm like, those negative thoughts of like, well, you don't look very good. They're there. But as long as I can see myself, like in a mirror or in a bit of glass, it sounds so vain. But I'm like,
it actually sounds very hopeful, because I'm the opposite. If I see myself, then the whole thing goes to pot. Because because the truth is that, you know, my notion of what I look like is not what I look like, it turns out. So, you know, that, and it really throws me. And it's been the same forever. And I mean, this is absolutely aside, but, you know, I mean, you do look amazing, Joe. I've seen many photos of you and you look different and incredible every time. But the thing is that, you know, I have always never been interested in what I look like, and really because it's always made me feel bad about myself. And then the irony is that you see pictures of yourself when you're young and you just go, well, I and everybody else I knew was utterly beautiful. What was I thinking? And but you know, it's easy in retrospect to be kind to yourself. And in the present, I find it very difficult. But it's also just so boring. It's so uninteresting to me to think about. You know, nowadays, what as long as I'm presentable, then I have to just let it go, because yeah, you know, there's much better things to worry about, and especially in this age of, you know, the selfie. I'm just so utterly horrified by how many people take pictures of themselves all day long and think about what they look like all day long.
Yeah.
I just can't imagine like how empty their lives must be.
Well, I think it's pressure. It is really hard, and actually, to get out of the self is really good. I have really started to be creative when I get into those moments where I'm like, oh, I'm stuck in my mind, I'm panicking,
Yeah.
I'm getting this anxiety, and actually, like, take some time to like draw or paint or do something like constructive. I find it just so nice. Like, okay, I can be productive. I can see an outcome. I've got it kind of coming together. I'm more than just what's in the body.
There's some parts.
Yeah, which is really nice. But I think it's interesting, again, like going back to collage, and I really want to hear about how you found collage as a medium, because I think that is such a great way to
I'm trying
to take control of an
think,
image, like take control of yourself or your surroundings. It kind of is a really nice thing, because you can cut things up how you want, you can rearrange it, and you can build a sort of landscape in the way that you want it. And so I'm quite intrigued, having said, oh, I didn't do that as a child. When and how did you like choose that as your medium?
Well, I guess it was a sort of gradual thing. I think that you know, naturally you're sort of told to draw and paint, aren't you? So I guess I did that for quite some time. And then obviously before you go to art college, you do a foundation and you have to experiment. So there was definitely some experience then with sculpture, which I think I hadn't had before. And ironically, even then I was making things with fabric and wire. So when I did go to St. Martin's, I think my relationship with painting was already sort of dwindling. And even though I really wanted to be a painter, I mean, really badly, because to me it was the highest form of art. You know, there's nothing better than a Cezanne or, you know, Velasquez or Morandi or, you know, so many people. It didn't take long before I was, you know, just really thinking my relationship with it was really unsatisfying, because I just couldn't ever be convinced, I guess, that I was right for it somehow. And whether my inability to sort of focus on one thing for a very long time was like just like came out of like feeling the medium was wrong, or I just am not able to focus on something for a long time. I know I was trying other things, and I think I was definitely feeling more satisfied. So it didn't take long before I was buying paper, I was buying fake fur, I was buying all sorts of things, cutting them up and sticking them down. And at the same time, of course, we were having lectures about simulation and postmodernism, and so it wasn't that, you know, that was necessarily even influencing me, but it was definitely validating my behavior and my choices. So that was really nice in a way, because it just seemed that somehow I was, you know, I'd gotten into the spirit of the time, and it was appropriate. So, you know, I'm looking at Hans Steinbeck, and I'm looking at all these sculptors who are bringing all of these different elements together. And and I'm looking at all the sort of newfound freedom that there seemed to be within postmodernism, that, you know, there was this theoretical lack of judgment. You could just put anything in a sculpture or an image. And the fact that it was now, that it was at that time, made it relevant, because that was the essence of postmodernism. You know, there were no boundaries and everything went. And yeah, that was really exciting. And I mean, it must have influenced me. And certainly John Steziker did, because, you know, he was doing this sort of program running alongside our regular projects, where he said, let's do this thing called the fifth area, and this is where people are working on sort of in another sphere. And I was one of those students that he took under his wing, and yeah, we were all making sort of collage things or film with things, and it was great.
Well, I mean, that has answered so many questions, because I feel that your collages often are transcending like the one media. So you're often putting contrasting media together, like textiles or paper, and they are very sculptural and they are quite cinematic. Often your pieces, that they have this sort of like either graphic quality like Bluebonnet does, or your more recent work, which is looking at flowers. It's very kind of, yeah, almost like quite a bold perception of what a flower is or can be. And so this all kind of makes sense.
Yeah. Well, I was really, always have been really interested in emblems and symbols. So show me a book of stickers and I absolutely love them. I love that somebody has taken this image and somehow found its very essence in a graphic form. And so they're so potent, you know, these little pictures. In the same way, I love any graphic image of a hamburger or a hot dog. I'm just like mad about these symbols, and I love iconography. I love something boiled down so that everybody can understand it. And obviously some are more pleasing than others, but essentially just that practice. There's a sort of magic in it to me, like everything is bound up in this like very, very what's the word? It's almost like a visual bomb, isn't it? Like everything is packed in there, and you just get this fabulous. Well, you get this sort of like flash of understanding at what you're looking at, and you don't need anything else, and it's just brilliant. And yeah, so at that time I was making those hairdo. I did a whole series called Hairdos, but at the same time I was doing palettes, so drawings of palettes that were very three-dimensional, because I love the fact that an artist has its own symbol. And I was doing
that's probably
silhouette.
My most used emoji is that palette.
Is it? Yeah, I just love it so much. It makes me so happy. So I was doing like glitter sticks and silhouettes of horses. All of these things would be decorated with three-dimensional bits, like bits of haberdashery. And so I was really, I was very interested in this sort of potent symbol, the potency of images, and also the fact that they sort of literally suggest this transformation and moving into another world, and this sense of magic, which I absolutely believe art is.
I think lecturers would love you to do talks on like semiotics and signifiers, because this is kind of like when you first start doing history of art, which is what I did. This is just what we try and sort of break down. And yeah, I think there is something really nice about that, breaking down, bringing everything together. Because one of the things that and this is just me personally, I hate writing in art. And I think
I'm afraid I agree.
Yeah, I don't know what it is, but I feel like it excludes something from the conversation. It excludes
people. Well, of course it does. It excludes the thing you're looking at.
And so I quite like it when artists try and find the same resonance, the same meaning in something that is non sort of that is not writing, that is not in writing?
Yes. Yeah, well, I love poetry because on some level it's like collage, because there are loads of words missing to suggest a scene or an experience or a narrative or a sensation. And so that's that sort of language. I love gardeners writing. Actually, somehow they always paint such a fantastic picture, and in a way I feel like that's what they're concerned with most of the time, painting pictures. And unfortunately for me, I feel like a lot of art writing doesn't give you any imagery. So, and it doesn't even talk about the imagery most of the time it's looking at. It talks about ideas. And sometimes they're very exciting, but not very often. And I think, well, I'm just like getting further and further away from the thing that you're actually talking about. So I'm getting less and less interested because I want to see the thing conjured or to know how you feel about it. And a lot of the time there isn't that.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a lot of critique of modern day art critique because it's not critique. And
yes.
I wonder how that's going to change. I also definitely feel that there is less fun in writing these days in art critique. Like there's less imagery, there's less kind of magic with words that's happening.
I totally agree. And so I spend so much, I'm just one of those people. I pick up an art book, and if it isn't full of pictures, I don't want it straight away. I immediately don't want it. There's many books that I pick up and think, well, I really should get that and I should read it. And I think, well, what's the point of even like thinking about it for another second, because I won't. I've tried, and there are a few people who I've enjoyed reading, but essentially, there's nothing better to me than looking at art and then studying how you feel about it, and then all the revelations that come later on how looking at various works of art and digesting them, how they impact you, what you think and what you feel and what you make later on. To me, it's absolutely thrilling, that constant sort of reflection on the connection I have with the art of the past and everything I've looked at and experienced. And in many ways, I think that's why I'm so interested in environments. And I don't necessarily mean installation art, because I think the thing about installation art is it isn't specific to something named installation art. What I'm referring to, like going into rooms and interiors and gardens, anything where somebody has actually considered a space and how you feel when you go into it. I find it's so influential really on me, because I think that there's so much psychologically we're affected by so many things, and I'm so deeply interested in that. And especially because everybody's perception is different, and the bottom line is that it's one's perception that makes you understand the world and produce what you produce. And so I find that notion absolutely thrilling.
Is installation work something that you'd like to do in the future?
Well, I've done it because I've made wallpapers and fabrics and bits of furniture. I'm really interested in this total experience. And I don't mean necessarily in an overwhelming way. I just mean that, to me, a white room is a waste of opportunity. You could have your wallpaper and then everything else you make.
I love that you said that, because I hate a white room. I just find
they absolutely bore me.
Just show me anything.
Yeah, that's well, and also I just think, why would you do this? I mean, like, there's so many great colors, there's so many great patterns, there's so many great things that you could just fill your world with. And so I find it very frustrating. I mean, obviously there are some, I don't know, I think of Kettle's Yard, for instance, like that house is so beautiful. And somehow that white was so incredibly contemporary. To have the objects within that white interior somehow was the height of modernism. And I get that. There are interiors where it really does make sense. But then not for very long, because then I'm just like, well, yeah, but then other things happened. Like, you can't just keep doing the white. Like, that doesn't make it contemporary or modern anymore. And it's not necessarily the right thing to do. Not everything looks its best against a white wall. It just doesn't. So, yeah.
I'm so glad. I'm so happy that you said that. I think that's really amazing. So when you are working on like a new textile or a wallpaper, how does that process work? Is that very similar to how you do your collages, or is it a completely different kind of process?
Well, they all come from me making an initial repeat print, so a small version, not necessarily in scale, because I usually actually get the wallpapers and fabrics printed the same scale as the original, but I'll have an A1 piece of paper, and I'll make a pattern on it, and that will be using sticks and vegetables that I print with. So I like the tools to actually create the image. And so but in saying that, I have been very interested in looking at my images of pictures and possibly working with photographic digital reproductions of a sort of 3-dimensional pattern that I made, and then turning that into wallpaper. I mean, there's sort of endless possibilities, but yeah, the wallpaper and the fabric designs actually came from me making initially unique prints over here in America with my vegetables and flower stems and bits of sort of nature. So I don't sit and draw something or paint something. I get a lot of paint on something and squash it down.
I like that, like getting stuck into the physical process.
Yeah, it's fun, and I say again that I don't. It's weird because I don't have this this physical recall of having done it when I was little. I don't think I made potato prints when I was little, so I guess I'm just making up for it.
That's so fun, and I think we all need to do that. I think we probably all would be far more well adjusted if we went back to just like doing potato prints and
definitely, and it's very linked to gardening. I mean, if you can get your fingers in the soil, there's something so primal and right about it.
Because you split your time, don't you? So you're in the UK half the time, and then you have a big garden.
No, it's only a third of the time in America. It's only a third. Well, it's about a third of the time in America. Yeah, and that's where I grow. I mean, we have a garden in London, but the truth is, it doesn't matter how lovely it is. I'm never there. I have to, when I'm in London, I have to leave the house and go to work immediately. Any other sensation I basically say to everybody, if I'm at home, it's Christmas. Otherwise, you'll never find me at home. It's very rare, or I'm very ill. But in America, of course, because it's the countryside where we are, in between my house and my studio is my huge vegetable garden. So that's sort of an extension of the studio. I mean, you can imagine it brings absolute quality of life because it's so satisfying to grow your own vegetables and then cook with them. So it's a sort of beautiful, the whole little journey is like my box of paints or something and box of materials.
That is amazing. That it's like, it's not just your inspiration, but it is your actual medium as well.
Yeah, I mean, like I said earlier, it had to be because I was too long in the garden. After a few years, I was just like, hang on a minute. We were doing this so that we could work longer and harder and not be disturbed. And I've just discovered gardening, and this isn't going to serve me. Nobody's going to employ me as a gardener. And anyway, I don't want to garden anybody else's house, but it's taking up too much time. I was like, okay, I've got to sort this out. So I did. I mean, it was such a revelation to me the first time I filled the wheelbarrow of vegetables and dragged them into the studio. Because I basically just said to them, okay, you've got to help me now because I've just spent too long with you. And so I did all of these photographs of me with the vegetables, and then I couldn't do that anymore. Suddenly, even without my face in the images, there was this horror of judgment. And I was just like, oh God, I started doing these 4 years ago, and look at the difference. This is horrible. So I stopped doing those, and I chopped up the vegetables and put some paint on them and made pictures with them, and thought, this is great because in a way, it just goes on and on, the possibilities of your relationship with the stuff that you grow.
That's amazing. So I just wanted to follow up about the vegetables, because I think it's something that's really interesting for me, having really come sort of so familiar with Bluebonnet and thinking about the figurative element, for you to transition away from the body, because that seems to have been so prevalent in your early work, to now being almost like completely devoid of humanness.
Well, it is, but I would say though, Joe, that so I was doing still life, after I was doing I was doing still life, and then I did the photos of me with the vegetables, and then all along the way I am taking pictures of flowers, and then I start really concentrating through the collage on the flowers. The auricular flower that I decided to sort of concentrate on, which are the base of all these collage flowers that I make now. I essentially take an image from the internet that's always rubbish. It's always slightly out of focus because you're not supposed to use them. And this is great because it basically means I've got this hard to decipher picture of an already weird looking flower. And then that's just a fantastic springboard in a way for me to make my image from. And I can't help always that, because I found this with the photographs of the flowers when I was growing my own flowers and then taking pictures of them. I always somehow thought that ultimately they looked like portraits of people. They always had characteristics. They always looked like somebody in a certain pose or in a certain mood. And so every time I do finish a collage, I can't help but somehow give it, personality traits. So I don't in a way feel I've completely left, the figure.
Yeah. I mean, that's a really good point, because the one thing that your images do have is character. They're very kind of, they've got charisma. And so which I suppose is a very like human trait. It's yeah.
Well, of course, you just have, I mean, in a way, like, so easily you can perceive the leaves as arms or hands, and the actual flower heads as the face. And then sometimes they become like beasts. They look like owls or birds or creatures. And I really enjoy that because that is the beauty of collage, really, that all these gorgeous accidents happen, and quite quickly there's a surreal element going on. So there's a strange sensation emerging from the image, and so I do really enjoy that. And I guess I try to cultivate it.
Yeah, but I think that it's really interesting. I was talking to Christopher Wood, who's a painter based in Leeds, who's also in this exhibition, who was talking about how sometimes, when they go for a walk, they see a snake in the woods, but it's suddenly they look again, it's not a snake, it's a tree root. But you've got that kind of surreal mind trip that goes on. And so I think it's quite nice when artists are openly surreal, because we all experience that in reality anyway. Like that's almost more real,
don't you think? I mean, I think so often, you are just going, oh, that was weird, or that's what's going on with that. So often there's nothing to comprehend. It's all like you don't really know what, and this is, I mean, the longer I live and the more I'm alive and the more time I give myself to sort of just to be, I guess, the more I do think this is all so weird. Everything's weird. You don't believe any of it. You can't trust any of it. But in a way, if you let yourself go to that sensation, it's absolutely fantastic.
Yeah. I mean, maybe it comes a time, but it terrifies me when I'm like, this is so weird. When I stop and I think about everything, I'm like, this is weird. This is crazy. We shouldn't be here. This is weird.
Well, I think the thing is, Joe, I think that if you were able to cultivate more time with that feeling, it wouldn't take you long before you just relaxed into it. And because suddenly that dissipates and you think, no, it's not weird at all, because in fact, none of it is real, including me. It's all the same mystery. Everything's one and the same mystery. And that's absolutely correct. you just relax into it, and you just think that's right, that is true, that, you know, this sort of notion that nothing is really comprehensible. I mean, I've been, you know, over the last summer I was listening to lots of podcasts about physics, and this notion that, you know, everything is the same and nothing, it's not real. And I mean, what is real, of course, but they talk about it all being some sort of screen. You know, there's another screen and another screen and another screen, and this first screen is just the most obvious one. And somehow, you know, the more you listen to these people talk, the more it makes sense. Quantum physics makes absolute sense, because there is this I think underlying constant unknowing, uncertainty. So as soon as you get somebody really talking about that, you just say, oh, thank God, you know, thank God, because I've always felt like that. And I think anybody does, if they just think for a certain length of time on what it is to exist and what everything is around them. You know, it's all a mystery.
It definitely is a mystery. I really like trying to figure it out on my own terms, like what is the purpose of it all? How do I feel comfortable in this space? How am I going to get through life? Like, I always want to transcend. I want to like almost just like leave this realm behind, which I know sounds crazy.
No, it does. Because you're finding ways of doing it through looking at art and such like.
Yeah, well, that's what I was going to say. But because art for me like opens up other possibilities of existence. It opens up all these other realms. You know, art for me, they are these other screens that kind of like let me enter into different places and different versions of me. And when I'm working with art or working with artists or looking at it and developing projects, it is another world that we create. And that is something that I find really, really special. And actually, even now, just thinking about you working with your vegetables, it's like you've grown these things. They're almost like not even just your objects, but almost like your collaborators, and you open up this new world together that you're making together. It's kind of beautiful. It's kind of very symbiotic.
Totally. And and I did keep using that word when I ever was asked about making that work and working with the vegetables, that my relationship with food is very visceral and very important to me. And so therefore my relationship with what, you know, I use to cook is really important. And so, yeah, I recognized really quickly that there was absolute give and take between me and nature particularly in gardening and cooking, and then in making the work with it. And I just thought it's just so perfect, this symbiosis, and it's absolutely accurate somehow. That is what is going on.
Has it given you a lot of clarity about the world around you and how you want to exist in this space?
Yeah, and it's so interesting because yesterday we were in Boston and we went to Thoreau's. We didn't actually go to his house. We were near Walden Pond, but we were reading Thoreau and Emerson, and it was so touching and so perfect because they both spoke about how your relationship, cultivating a deep relationship with the natural world, really, really helps you understand, of course, not only your position in the world, but your relationship with other people and how you want that to be. And it's so true because, you know, I think to cultivate a relationship with nature and to actually go back to basics, i.e. to plant things and to see them grow from seed, and then you have the end result, and then to do something with that. There is something so primal about it that things fall into place, that you just can't help but not feel better adjusted, to have a sort of just be more grounded. I mean, it sounds very obvious when I say that, but yeah. And I was just looking at, I keep all sorts of things that I accidentally find that people have said. And D.H. Lawrence wrote this amazing thing about making and looking and being, and if you want, I could read it to you, or I'll just send it to you. It's amazing. And it talks about, you know, the cosmos and prayer. And I've always felt in many ways that concentrating to make art is an act of devotion and therefore an act of prayer. And it does relate directly to the fact that what I was brought up a Catholic for some time. I mean, I completely lost my faith, but it's impossible for it to not remain, you know, somehow deep, just the language of it in a way. And I do love ritual, and I do love
That's very Catholic.
Yeah, totally. But there's something so beautiful about ritual, and it relates again to symbols and emblems. There are these very potent, compressed, moments. I mean, of course, I feel like a ritual is really a symbol in time. You know, you get this very compressed experience. You get the whole thing within a few moments and a few minutes, and I guess they're so simple.
And there's a connection in time to something that's happened before.
Yeah, and what was I saying? Anyway, so obviously when you are working in nature, there is so much of that element that there is this really quickly, you're so full of awe. You just cannot believe that this little bit of intervention you made produced that. You just can't believe it. It's like an absolute miracle. And you know it isn't. You know that all over the place, seeds are falling and creating all sorts of incredible things around you. And you didn't even do that. Nature just did it. But when you actually get the opportunity to intervene, you just cannot believe it. And so there's a direct relation, I think, to prayer and spirituality in creating anything, really.
But
whether it's squash or a picture.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is very true. And I mean, you know, I've said already today, you know, when I'm trying to soothe myself, you know, I go into a creative mode, and that's like a ritual that I'm kind of doing in some ways.
Yeah.
Like it's almost like a prayer kind of thing. You're going through emotion to try and get an outcome of calm. But I mean, even like for you, just to return it to like collage, it's so funny because I love everything you've said about nature, but it just almost feels kind of ironic that all of those years ago when you were doing Blue Bonnet, you were working in like glitter, which is so man-made, so kind of unnatural. And it's one of the qualities that I really like about that work, but it feels so different to where you are now.
Well, can I just say that I've always, so from a really young age, I think that it wasn't instilled in me, it was somehow just omnipotent or something. There was this lack of hierarchy in imagery, and it wasn't that I was told that is equal to that. I felt it. I absolutely believed it, that I could be looking at something that that people who looked at art might think was crappy, and I would think it was great. You know, I think it was equally great. And I think that must be from having some sort of varied visual education that I didn't even know was happening. And also maybe it does come from, I mean, my mother was really well educated, but we were very poor. And somehow within that, you know, there's much time spent not judging things because you just had to make do. You know, you couldn't reject something because it wasn't good enough or beautiful enough or nice enough. You just had to have it. And that I think is a really positive sort of framework for making art with, because, you know, before I knew it, when I went to St. Martin's and I was buying all of these, all of this nylon and plastic and like mass-produced materials, I realised that I relished these things as much as when I went into the National Gallery and I looked at the Carlo Crivellis or the what else did I used to go and look at that I love? Tintorettos, all these beautiful Renaissance paintings. I realised I love them just as much. And then I ended up writing my thesis on kitsch, and it was called something like Hyperreality, the Spirit in Kitsch. And I absolutely believed that these things were equal, and I still do. And the great thing about quantum physics, or getting into that sort of level of thinking about the universe, is that you do learn that everything is equal. So it doesn't matter that it was made in China and there's gazillions of it. You know, it's the same as me. It's the same as that Ming vase. It's all the same thing at the end of the day. So I was right. Huh.
I love that. And yeah, because I was just reading a book as well that was talking about kitsch and about how that is the truth. That is about truth.
What book is that?
It's called Less Than Nothing. It's very much like what we've been talking about.
Brilliant.
And yeah, they were, because I was reading it and I was because it's talking about like how a lot of people who want to tear things down, which I've often said I wanted to.
Me too. Don't think I'm absolutely without judgment, because I definitely am.
Well, it was sort of saying how like people like us who try to tear things down to reveal truths, we're often not looking at the truth that is in front of us. You know, what is the truth? Is it the mask or is it what's underneath? Like, if the mask has been on for long enough, then that is the truth. You know, so like, what are you actually revealing? Is it something? Are we tearing things down so that we make other people look at our perspectives, which is not even the truth of what's there, but just us? And so it was like thinking about like all these different ways you can interpret that action of tearing down, and how you can sort of push it on to selflessness when actually it's a very selfish thing. And one
of my favorite quotes is Anna Houston, and she says, "We do not see things as they are; we see things as we are."
Yeah.
It's perfect, isn't it?
That is brilliant. That's the truth. That is the truth.
Exactly. It's impossible to see things as they are.
Yeah. And it's also hard when you think about like being in the world that we are in, which is so global. And if you don't have that local knowledge, it's impossible to see it how they see it or somebody else sees it. We just like tell other people how we see it.
Yes. Yeah, but don't you just love that telling everybody, because it's just so exciting. I mean, I remember years ago when I didn't know this, but I learned that in other countries, animals do not make the same noise. So a cockerel doesn't say cock-a-doodle-doo, you know, in Portugal or Brazil. And I was like, what? Well, I've always wanted to do a children's book where it has at least 3 languages describing the noise, and I'd illustrate it, because to me it's so divine. There's something so beautiful about the fact that everywhere in the world the animals make a different noise, but we all hear the same sound and we describe it differently. It's so beautiful.
That different perspective is really lovely. But even just something, again, a bit like collage, you experience that with children, and you think of animal noises and you think of children, like, what does it say? Meow.
Yeah.
And then, you know, it's something very like innate in us to return to animal noises.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
I love it that you speak Japanese. I wish I spoke another language. To my shame, I do not.
Oh, it is really fun because you do have those things, and sometimes I'm like, because obviously English is my first language and it's my native language, and I find spelling in English really, really hard. Japanese is phonetic, and obviously I still struggle a little bit with it, but because it's phonetic, I find it much easier. But then the sentence structure I find really hard, and so like sometimes in my head I'm like, what are these people saying? What am I saying?
By people who can speak more than one language, because I can't remember the question I had the other day, but it was something like, so if you are speaking in your second language or third language or fourth, if you're speaking it, are you at the same time thinking in your native language?
Well, when I lived in Japan, I wasn't thinking in my native language when I was speaking it. But that's when I had a job out there. That's before COVID. That's when I was like living with my Japanese family out there, and I wouldn't speak English day to day. I would speak Japanese.
Do you think?
But
Joe,
now it's different. Now it's completely different.
Do you think
Yeah.
you thought different things? Isn't that so? That is so wild to me.
Because you think in a different structure.
Yes.
But
Yes.
now after COVID, I've just been able to go back to Japan for the first time this year. And I haven't seen my Japanese family for 3.5 years. And when I went back, I was like, this is crazy. Like, I can't really speak it anymore. And it's so hard. It's so unnatural.
Yeah.
So it's very weird seeing your languages come and go and form different things in your mind.
Incredible. I'm so ashamed of myself, but really I just disappointed in myself, because I think it must be extraordinary to have this dual, because I do think it gives you, unless you've spoken this other language for years and years and years, and everyone very frequently, I think you must have a different personality too in your second language.
Yeah, I definitely like, one of the things that I love about Japanese is surprise, shock. Like I feel like everything is very shocking, and you're always like, "Eh, oh," and you do make these noises.
I see Japanese people, they look shocked a lot of the time. They're either shocked or they're laughing.
Yeah, and you definitely adopt that. You definitely change, and I notice as well when I go to Japan, my appetite changes. Like, when I'm over there, I will eat all the intestines, all the fish eyes, everything. But if you even thought about giving me like offal here, I would be like, oh, there's no way I'm eating that.
See, but isn't that incredible?
Out there, I'm like, yes, please. I'll have seconds.
That is really incredible, because it is you speaking the language that is literally changing your psychology. Because if you were there speaking English, I'm sure you wouldn't want the offal. If you only spoke English.
Probably not. Yeah.
That's so extraordinary. It's so fascinating.
But do you have a difference when you go to America?
I guess so. I was actually thinking of the difference that no doubt occurs to me when I go back to Yorkshire. I mean, there's such obvious things, but there must be subtle things as well. There must be things that I accept and tolerate, and maybe even are enthralled by in Yorkshire that I wouldn't be in London. I'm sure there are.
Do you miss Yorkshire?
No, it's fascinating, yeah. But I think the thing about America, I guess I probably assert my Britishness a bit more than I would, certainly in London. I enjoyed that, yeah.
Yeah. Because I love being from Yorkshire. I'm obsessed with it, and
I do. I love it too, isn't it? Well, yeah, I do too, and it's so funny. I didn't for a long time. I wasn't ashamed, but I just was like, oh no, let me shed that. And now as you get older, you just think it's actually fabulous. The differences in regions, anyway, are fabulous.
Yeah, I find it very weird with friends. Like, I always kind of want them to see me in Yorkshire, because I'm like, this is such a big part of who I am, and you've got to come and see me here, because this is it.
Well, it's so funny, because I am just so delighted when I meet another Yorkshire person. It's silly, but I'm just delighted.
I love it when I'm in London. When I'm in London,
another Yorkshire person the other day as well. Another Joe, in fact. I met another one the other day, and I was just like, hooray!
Brilliant, yeah. Or no matter where I am in the world, if I meet you and you're from Yorkshire, I will just be obsessed. I will be so happy.
Me too. And I'll probably think, oh, we should move in together. Like, we should just have a few together, definitely. It's ridiculous.
I don't know what it is. It's just so nice. And yeah, but sometimes when I'm working in London, I'm like, oh, only you were from Yorkshire. We'd probably just have a bit more fun.
I know what you mean. Well, it's terrible, but one of my best friends here is from Yorkshire. And when he's the husband of a friend I went to college with, completely coincidentally, he's English but Malaysian. So when he introduced me to his Yorkshire boyfriend, I was just like, this is fantastic.
Yeah. Well, Georgie, this has been Amazing. And I feel like we've got really off topic from collage
I know.
and Blue
I
Bonnet
know,
and
but maybe we're
exhibiting.
talking about, yeah, but we are talking about ancestry and how we get everywhere.
Yes.
Yorkshire people are collaged all over the world, it turns out.
And it is so fun. I was just wanting to know if there are any projects that you've got happening now or in the next year or so that people might want to be aware of, and how they can follow what you're up to and things like that.
Well, at the moment, there's nothing on, but my next show will be either with Lindsay Ingram Gallery, so that's my gallery in London, and it probably will be an exhibition of fabrics and wallpaper and bits of furniture. So it's in my mind, it's called the Repeat Show. So, you know, from the designs I did, but at the same time, I'm hoping at some point, either then or a little bit later, I will have an exhibition of these pictures that I started during lockdown after saying COVID will not change anything I make whatsoever. How could it? I ended up at a moment when we were allowed to go somewhere, and we went to Italy, and I saw Fra Angelica's incredible religious friezes in San Marco, and I'm still doing a series of pictures based on these basically images where Christ's suffering is contemplating. So yeah, they're very different to my flower collages. So I'm hoping there will be a show of those round about the same time, and both will be early next year, I hope. And then I might even have a show sometime then at the Garden Museum in London.
Well, I am really intrigued to see your furniture. I think that'd be really cool to see, because I haven't seen any of that physically. I've just seen pictures of it online. And I love those Fra Angelico frescoes. And they're incredible. That feeds so much into symbolism, because for the people who don't know, the Fra Angelico is often just taking like snapshots of moments and kind of collaging them on top of other moments. And it's all just about, Christ suffering, and it was for an audience of monks who knew the stories. And so Fra Angelico was just putting these like snapshots to get people to think. And that is just like what we've been talking about. And so I'm really, really intrigued to see your interpretation.
Well, I hope I still feel very strange about them. And I guess it's just because I shed Catholicism. But honestly, I cannot, I can't, I see a picture of Christ, like either rising from the tomb on the cross or being taunted. And I'm just like, I have to look at this for ages, and I have to think about this for ages. And of course, I'm not thinking about Christ at all. I'm thinking about humanity. And somehow it seemed really necessary to make those pictures for me, because I have always been so moved by that sort of art. But those Fra Angelicas are astonishing. They're like a wonder of the world. And the fact that you go into each cell to contemplate one image, just increases the potency to a level that's just mind-blowing, I think. I mean, there's nobody I've spoken to about them who's seen them who hasn't said, yes, they are a wonder of the world. I mean, they're just incredible.
They are absolutely phenomenal. And it feels so strange, doesn't it? Because obviously when you think of Florence, you think of the Uffizi. And actually there's this small space. These monk cells. Which are all decorated by this incredible artist, and you can go and have a complete sort of revelation in that space. Whereas the Uffizi is just like boom, 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 crowd, 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 hit, hit, hit. And museum fatigue sets in just like that.
Yeah. I mean, I have to say, you can imagine how incredible it was going to Florence for a few days in the middle of COVID, the moment we were allowed to do something. There had been this desert of culture, and I'd been feeling so sad in London. I mean, all I did was work, which I love. I mean, I love nothing more than being in the studio until 2:00 in the morning. I just love it. And that's what I was doing. But I would cycle, of course, to work and home, and I would just see Nothing really, no endeavour. This is what made me so sad. No endeavour, and understood that all of these businesses were potentially closing, that you couldn't go and look at anything to feed your inspiration. You know, you just basically had the streets, the empty streets. And I really felt very blue about the whole thing. I mean, a city is so wrong when nobody's able to do anything in it. It's just so utterly wrong. So yeah, going to Florence and seeing those, and going to the Uffizi, which had in fact been rehung and cleaned up since we'd last gone. I mean, it was truly extraordinary. It was amazing.
Yeah. Well, I do recommend everybody go to San Marco if they are in Florence.
Yeah.
I think it's great.
Yeah.
I think it's a really
Thank you,
beautiful place.
Joe. This has been so lovely.
This has been honestly so much fun. I'm so glad we've been able to make this work. This has been amazing. I've loved hearing about your process, and it's given me a whole new insight into Bluebonnet. And yeah, thank you so much.
Really, it's been an absolute joy, and you're brilliant. Thank you so much. Really.
Well, so are you.
Well, when I saw you, which wasn't even that long ago, I was like, oh my God, this man has so much energy and he's got so much to say. It's incredible. So really, thank you. You're brilliant.
Well, thank you so much. I hope that we can work on other things in the future, and it'll be so fun to meet you when you're back in the UK. So thanks for taking time out.
Let's do that, definitely. Now we know that we have our homeland in common. Exactly. We have to. Compulsory.
Exactly. Yeah, mandatory. Anyway, Georgie, thank you so much for joining me. I hope everybody can come and see Georgie's work. It's in Total Recall, Myth and Memory at the Mercer Art Gallery on until October 15th. And yeah, it's brilliant, and enjoy it.
Lovely. Thanks so much, Joe.